Following the whole Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot box debacle that occurred in late 2017, what we're seeing worldwide is a lot of countries, a lot of politicians, a lot of parents waking up to the reality that loot boxes are harmful and a problem and should not be in video games, especially games that are played by kids. In the last year, we've seen a lot of AAA game publishers doubling down. One of the good examples I can bring up recently is, well, 2K Games, pretty much making NBA 2K20 an online casino and using influencers to shill it on up. And then we have obviously Grand Theft Auto Online, which added its own online casino. I mean, the gaming industry isn't hiding the gambling element that is featured in a lot of video games nowadays. It's hilarious still to me that this gaming industry argues that loot boxes aren't slot machines. They're practically just that. Now, earlier this year, the BBC published a series of stories about the harm that loot boxes have had on families. And I'm not going to go through these articles in depth, but I just want you to read the headlines of these horror stories, I guess you could say, especially with families that are living paycheck to paycheck. My son spent £3,160 on one game. Basketball game cost our family £2,000. Our son spent £700 on Clash of Clans. Obviously, everybody's given up on the mobile gaming industry, but that's where the trouble really began, and it's just exploded everywhere into free-to-play, into this AAA gaming industry. My daughter installed the same game 3 times. My 11-year-old daughter spent over £100 of my money in a day downloading apps that are the same. He was completely inconsolable. I installed Mini Golf King on my phone for my son who is 5. He knows he's not allowed to spend money in games, yet this game successfully tricked him into spending £300 on in-app purchases. My boy spent almost £1,000 on Fortnite. Our daughter's free trial cost £93. And then there's even this story that says the kids emptied our bank account playing FIFA. 4 children spent nearly £550 in 3 weeks buying player packs to play the FIFA football video game on the family's Nintendo Switch console. These stories aren't rare. This is something that we've all known is an issue for the longest time, but the Entertainment Software Association, which represents much of this gaming industry, they've kind of just ignored the problem and just said, oh, it's not a big deal. It's like baseball cards. And the funniest thing is, they've also said that there isn't enough research to prove that there's a link between loot boxes and gambling, but that's not true. In the last year or two, well, the studies are coming. Like an Australian study that was published in late 2018 said that loot boxes are more like gambling than baseball cards. So this argument that loot boxes are like baseball cards, even though it was absurd to most of us, it's BS. But today, the reason why I'm bringing all of this up and why we're talking loot boxes is because the United Kingdom looks like they're about to crack down on loot boxes. This is following the United States, which is seemingly doing the same, but I'll read the headline. We're going to go through the report because it really is. It slams the gaming industry, and it really is something, it's beautiful because this is something that's been needed for the longest time, and it's good that this is getting the attention that it's deserved. And this is coming from VG247, says the new report from the UK's DCMS has some scathing things to say about loot boxes and the games industry. The Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee has published its investigation on the effects of in-game gambling and other addictive mechanics. The big report outright asked for loot boxes to be removed from games being sold to children. Now, as I said before, the United Kingdom going after loot boxes that's a big deal, but we've already seen some other countries taking action. The biggest examples that I've brought up in the past year or two is Belgium and the Netherlands. This report coming from the Eurogamer says, hot on the heels of the Netherlands declaring loot boxes as gambling and therefore illegal, Belgium has had its say. The Belgian Gaming Commission looked at Star Wars Battlefront 2, FIFA 18, Overwatch, and Counter-Strike Global Offensive and found only Star Wars was not in violation of the country's gambling legislation, and that's only because EA stripped out the game's loot boxes after its launch debacle. It determined that FIFA 18, Overwatch, and CSGO's loot boxes are a game of chance and so are subject to Belgium's gambling law. Battlefront 2 at the time of this investigation was conducted did not have loot boxes, so it escapes unscathed. And obviously, Belgium came down hard on these games, saying that FIFA 18, Overwatch, and CSGO were therefore illegal and demanded that their loot boxes were removed. If not, the publishers risk a prison sentence of up to 5 years and a fine of up to €800,000. When minors are involved, those punishments can be doubled. And that was what the Minister of Justice said. Now obviously this is a report coming from early 2018, but it shows that there are some European countries that are really taking this seriously, and they are understanding that the gaming industry is using loopholes to avoid regulation, and also not taking action is a big issue. If this gaming industry actually took action and did self-regulation, this wouldn't be a problem, but they don't care because loot boxes make billions of dollars, and they don't want that money going away. And obviously earlier this year we discussed this, but the United States seems to be getting in on the action, or at least on the federal level. A Republican senator introduced a bill called the Protecting Children from Abusive Games Act, which would make video games that are marketed to children that would be prohibited from implementing any pay-to-win mechanisms. All games would be forbidden from selling loot boxes to children. And we've actually had some bipartisan support for this bill, but we haven't heard much since. Now again, let me emphasize that Josh Hawley, the Republican senator from Missouri, he was the one who introduced this bill. But the ones who actually got on board was the Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, and Senator Ed Markey, Democrat from Massachusetts. They obviously endorsed this bill and bipartisan support. We have not heard much since, so it's really unclear where this bill is and when we're actually going to hear more about it. But obviously we all know that the gaming industry is fighting this hard, because if it passes, there's going to be problems for this gaming industry, and those loot box mechanics will go bye-bye. But now let's proceed forward, because we have to discuss the UK parliamentary committees, what they actually said in their report. I'm going to read line for line and give my own take, but this is down in their article. They're talking about age ratings in games, and I found this very, very interesting. There are inconsistency in the game industry's self-regulation around the distribution of games. If companies hold that it's not their responsibility, but that of parents to enforce age ratings, and parents themselves are not willing to or able to do so, further legislation may be needed to protect children from playing games that are not appropriate for their age. This could include extending the statutory duties that apply to physical distribution to the online distribution of games. Likewise, game companies should not assume that their responsibility to enforce age ratings applies exclusively to the main delivery platforms. All companies and platforms that are making games available online should uphold the highest standards of enforcing age ratings. Yes, because they actually care about doing that. They won't, and that's why this is the problem. The gaming industry doesn't want to self-regulate. That's how we all want them to act, but they won't do that. They're just waiting for legislation. That's the biggest issue. When people defend loot boxes, I'm like, well, the gaming industry they're not taking action against this problem because they don't see it as a problem, because it makes them billions of dollars. Until legislation goes through, this is when you're going to see real action, and then they'll act like they're actually taking control of the problem. In the past, they've slapped a sticker on a game saying that there's in-game purchases, and that's about it, really. But finally, let's proceed forward, and this is where we get into the monetization and loot box topic, and what this report says, it slams the gaming industry. In the past, the games industry was built on a premium model. People paid upfront for a hard copy of a game, and that was the only opportunity for monetization. However, the growth of internet-connected games has enabled the industry to develop new ways of making money, including through macrotransactions. Again, we're getting rid of that microtransaction word. Small payments, they're never small, that players make throughout the process of playing a game, for example, to acquire in-game skills or items to progress more quickly through levels. And then this is where we have to go further down into this report, where they're talking about the connection from gambling and to loot boxes. One of the most prominent features in the debate about the potential links between game mechanics and gambling is loot boxes. Loot boxes are slot machines, items in video games that may be bought for real-world money, but which provide players with a randomized reward of uncertain value. Those rewards will be virtual items for use in the game, such as tools, outfits, and weapons, or characters with particular skills, all of which will be a variable benefit within the game. They are a common form of macrotransaction, with a 2018 Gambling Commission survey finding that 31% of 11 to 16-year-olds have paid money or used in-game items to open loot boxes. Although some games, including notably a version of Fortnite, reveal the contents of a loot box to the player before they decide whether to pay for it, usually the contents of loot boxes are unknown to the player at the point of purchase. What a player gets for their money is therefore based on chance. One of the good examples of a publisher exploiting players is Call of Duty Black Ops 4, the publisher Activision. They've done this for years and they've continued to get away with it, but Activision's greed and what they've done with the Call of Duty franchise is the perfect example of the problem that this gaming industry has, and not addressing the problem is it's an issue. Now, moving further down into this article, this is where we get into the slamming of Electronic Arts. Much of the evidence that we received from gamers critique the loot box mechanics in Electronic Arts' FIFA series. In the game's Ultimate Team mode, players build their own football team by buying virtual packs containing a randomized selection of footballers. To purchase these packs, players use coins that are earned in the game and points purchased for real-world money. In 2016, EA CFO Blake Jorgensen told investors that the Ultimate Team mode accounted for roughly half of the $1.3 billion the company makes from extra digital content. That is equivalent to $650 million in annual revenue, in addition to that generated by unit sales of the full games. Electronic Arts releases a new game in the FIFA series every year. However, with each new release, players' teams are not transferred over, and therefore they must rebuild their teams by purchasing more packs to acquire the best players. One gamer told us that this cycle resulted in them spending almost £800 to £1,000 a year annually on FIFA, and that's exactly what this gaming industry loves. They love their whales. Another gamer told us that because the pack's content directly affects gameplay because some players are not as good as others, it incentivizes people to keep buying packs in the hope of getting better players and therefore performing better in the game. They told us that. In order to compete, players feel like they need to buy hundreds if not thousands of pounds worth of packs in order to get the best players. Children are especially vulnerable because they lack the maturity to understand that these purchases are manipulative, and their parents may not understand that these purchases are entirely unnecessary. Moreover, because the probability of securing some footballers and packs are less than 1%, some gamers have expressed frustration at spending vast amounts without receiving the desired reward. To tackle the issue of speculative spending on loot boxes, one player recommended that the sale of items in-game, cosmetic or otherwise, should only be allowed via direct purchase or via achievements unlocked through in-game actions. In a loot box type system, the player typically has a very small chance of unlocking the item they actually want. This encourages further spending on loot boxes in order to get the item they want. And this is you all know this one, the surprise mechanics comment. They bring it up in this report. We put some of these concerns to Kerry Hopkins from EA, who responded that the way they've implemented this mechanic in FIFA is quite ethical and quite fun.
Consider them ethical.
So what we look at as surprise mechanics, but I think it's important to look at this. So if you go to a I don't know what your version of Target is, but a store that sells a lot of toys, and you do a search for surprise toys, what you'll find is that this is something people enjoy. They enjoy surprises, and so it's something that's been part of toys for years, whether it's Kinder Eggs or Hatchimals or LOL Surprise. We do think the way that we have implemented these kind of mechanics, and FIFA, of course, is our big one, our FIFA Ultimate Team and our packs, is actually quite ethical and quite fun, enjoyable to people. We agree with the UK Gambling Commission, the Australian Gambling Commission, and many other gambling commissions that they aren't gambling, and we also disagree that there's evidence that shows it leads to gambling.
Yet this is noticeably out of step with the attitude of many of the gamers who contacted us following our evidence session, including those who vehemently rejected her characterization of packs not as loot boxes but as that BS. One gamer called the company's testimony to us a barefaced lie, yes it was, and another told us that the company has heavily marketed and referred to their systems as loot boxes for several years, and the mechanics of the system are exactly the same, no matter what they choose to call it. Ooh, this is so spicy and I like it. And this is where the recommendation comes in, people. The United Kingdom's Parliamentary Committee says, we recommend that loot boxes that contain the element of chance should not be sold to children playing games, and instead in-game credits should be earned through rewards won through playing the games. In the absence of research which proves that no harm is being done by exposing children to gambling through the purchasing of loot boxes, then we believe the precautionary principle should apply, and they are not permitted in games played by children until the evidence proves otherwise. And the thing is, this gaming industry doesn't have any scientific evidence that proves anything of what they're saying. They're speaking out of their butts, pretty much. That's the best way to put it. I mean, all of the scientific research that has come out in the last year or two has proven that there is a link between gambling and loot boxes. It's as simple as that, but this gaming industry doesn't want to recognize that because money. Now, this report next goes into potential harms of loot boxes. And I'm only going to read parts of this. I'm going to go quickly over because there's still more we need to go over, and this has already been a long video. We have heard concerns about the structural and psychological similarities between loot boxes and gambling. Dr. Aaron Drummond and Dr. James Sauer told us in written evidence that the random delivery of loot box rewards is akin to conventional gambling products and designed to exploit potential psychological mechanisms associated with the development and maintenance of gambling-like behaviors. I mean, these people have psychologists hired, some of these gaming publishers. They have them hired to exploit players. That's their job, that's what they're doing, and they're not hiding it. They're pretty blatant about this. They're monetization experts, that's what they call them. But proceeding forward, the next few statements are about this Australian study, which found that loot boxes are more like gambling than baseball cards, and I'm not going to really go over this because this is already territory that we've discussed, and also for the sake of time, but I will read this bold comment that says, loot box mechanics are integral to major game companies' revenues, and evidence that they facilitate profiting from problem gamblers should be of serious concern to the industry. We recommend that working through the PEGI Council and all other relevant channels, the UK government advises PEGI to apply the existing gambling content labeling and corresponding age limits to games containing loot boxes that can be purchased for real-world money and do not reveal their content before purchase. Next here, though, we can see that the report brings up some of the other action that's happening around the world. They bring up Belgium and the Netherlands, what they've actually done. We talked about that earlier in this video. And they also bring up China, in which China games that feature loot boxes are legally required to state the odds of obtaining each item. And that's why game publishers have been they've been making that part of their games across the world. It started with China, and they forced the game publishers to do that. It's not about generosity. The game publishers are just like, whatever, if we're going to do it in China, we might as well do it around the rest of the world and make it look like we're taking action against loot boxes, or at least, I guess, thinking about consumers, which they're not. And then we actually have the mention of skin betting. There are other ways in which games have become linked to betting. For example, skin betting or skin gambling is the use of virtual items acquired in a game as a method of payment for a stake in external, unlicensed gambling. A recent Gambling Commission survey found that 3% of 11 to 16-year-olds had bet with in-game items on websites outside of video games or privately. Since 2015, the Gambling Commission has investigated a number of websites that facilitates for this form of unlicensed gambling, including to children. And one of those games that's been primary in that, the skin betting, is, I think, CSGO. Now, to the conclusion that this committee actually gives, they say that we agree with the Gambling Commission that game companies should be doing more to prevent in-game items from being traded for real-world money or being used in unlicensed gambling. These uses are a direct result of how games are designed and monetized, and their prevalence undermines the argument that loot boxes are not a form of gambling. Moreover, we believe that the existing concept of money's worth in the context of gambling legislation does not adequately reflect people's real-world experiences of spending in games. We consider loot boxes that can be bought with real-world money and do not reveal their contents in advance to be games of chance played for money's worth. The government should bring forward regulations under Section 6 of the Gambling Act 2005 in the next parliamentary session to specify that loot boxes are a game of chance. If it determines not to regulate loot boxes under the act at this time, the government should produce a paper clearly stating the reasons why it does not consider loot boxes paid for with real-world currency to be a game of chance played for money's worth. So yes, those loopholes that this gaming industry has exploited for the longest time. You know, when the gaming industry says all these countries have declared that loot boxes aren't gambling, that's not true. The reality is that these gaming publishers have used loopholes to get away with their nonsense. And the loopholes are just that gambling legislation all across the world is out of date. It's not up to date with what these gaming publishers are doing, and now it looks like countries like the United Kingdom and the United States are taking action and realizing this problem. Now, I'm not going to go through the rest of this report. It goes through a lot of other gaming topics, but this was the real part that I needed to discuss because it looks like we're proceeding forward. It looks like part of the United Kingdom wants to take action against this problem, and it'll be interesting because I bet you the Entertainment Software Association and their lobbyists are going to fight this hard, just like they probably are doing with the United States bill. But most importantly, the new CEO of the ESA earlier this year, or maybe maybe it was last year, he said that in 2018, 24 bills aimed at regulating loot boxes were introduced in 9 United States, and the industry organization defeated them all. So like I said, they're going to fight this hard, and their action thus far has been pitiful. Look at this. The only thing that they've actually done is add an in-game app purchase marker on the ESRB rating. That's it in the United States, and that's nothing. It doesn't even specify what an in-game purchase is. It could be an expansion, a story expansion, like The Witcher 3 received, or it could be loot boxes, like Star Wars Battlefront 2 originally had. And yes, I know the game's a lot different now, but I'm talking about what it was. So yeah, the next steps that this industry takes will be interesting. Earlier this year, actually it was just about a month or two ago, Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony required loot box odds to be disclosed in all of their games. They all committed to it, and it's kind of like too little too late. This action should have been taken years ago, and now they're actually taking action because they realize legislation is coming. It really is. It's too little too late unless they actually self-regulate, crack down on this loot box problem, but it makes too much money and they're just going to fight this in the courts until they eventually lose. And it's taking time, but we're getting there, and it's going to be very interesting how this industry reacts when one of these major countries, whether that be the United States or the United Kingdom or even Australia or wherever, actually say that loot boxes are banned. Obviously Belgium and the Netherlands have banned it. The now former ESA president said this, I believe it was last year, "We can't go to the lowest common denominator of government around the world and make that the standard the rest of the world has to live by and limit the trajectory of the industry." That was his reaction to Belgium and the Netherlands all but banning loot boxes. So right now, all I can say that this new report, it could be huge. I mean, it's surprising because earlier this year, the digital minister, Margot James, defended loot boxes, and she actually said, "I would also contest the assumption that loot boxes are gambling. I don't think the evidence I've read from your committee's hearings would support that assumption either." So now it's a little different, and it's going to be interesting what this leads to, if there's actually going to be action in the United Kingdom and around the world. I mean, it seems like countries are waking up to realize the reality that we've already known of, and that loot boxes are a problem that must be stopped. And as I've said throughout this video and in past videos for the last number of years, the gaming industry is going to fight this hard, but they've had the opportunity to self-regulate this problem, but they have just not cared because it makes so much money, and now they pay the consequences for that. Before we wrap up this video, I actually have a quick update I wanted to include in this video. The Independent Game Developers Association, a trade group, did respond to this report. Pretty much said that the government should urgently carry out research around loot boxes and gambling. That was something that the CEO of Taiga said. Additionally, PEGI actually also released their own statement on this report, and they pretty much said that PEGI is currently reviewing the various recommendations in the report and discussing the practical implications of these recommendations. "We are committed to remain a trusted source of information for parents and consumers regarding the content of video games. There's already a lot of debate ongoing about the concerns that are raised in the report, and we will continue to work with the authorities to find appropriate solutions to ensure that gamers of all ages can play in a safe and responsible environment." And PEGI has obviously been under fire for how they rated NBA 2K20, which is pretty much like an online casino, which children can play. It's also worth mentioning one of the recommendations in the report we just discussed that I didn't get to was that they proposed an industry tax to fund research into the harmful effects of gaming, and pretty much it seems like all the associations are like, yeah, we just need more research into this, and it's interesting what this is all going to conclude with, but I mean, the evidence has already been out there for a long time. There is a link between gambling and loot boxes, and this is something that the industry cannot run away from. They will have to act, or governments worldwide will, well, they'll create their own legislation and take their own action. I'm sure the gaming industry and a lot of us don't want to see that happen, but here we are. And there's actually one more update I have to give because the Entertainment Software Association has responded, and what a surprise, they strongly disagree with this report, and the trade group points to promises of odds disclosure as evidence it is a leader in partnering with parents and players. They actually believe because they give loot box odds, they're showing that they care about consumers. That's not how this works, and nobody's fooled by this. If the gaming industry truly cared about consumers, loot boxes, which are pretty much exploitative, predatory, manipulative monetization features, they would not be in video games, period. Loot boxes, in numerous studies now, have been found to be a harmful feature that is more akin to gambling mechanics rather than baseball cards, which is what the ESA wants everybody to believe, but that's not backed by anything. The ESA, the only thing they care about is their pockets, and loot boxes make billions of dollars, and they're going to keep defending that until legislation comes. And it's going to be sad because the fact that government has to get involved, it's a little scary because we don't know where it's going to end. But the fact that the ESA doesn't understand the consequences that could happen from legislation just shows how foolish they are. And they also point to how other government bodies, Australia, France, Ireland, Germany, have said that loot boxes aren't gambling. The reason why they've said that is because of outdated gambling legislation, and once that gambling legislation gets updated worldwide, well, those loot boxes they're going to be gambling, because that's the only reason why they get by is because of loopholes. Anyway, this video has gone on long enough, but it's not surprising at all that the ESA strongly disagrees with a report that pretty much bashes and slams loot boxes, and many of the publishers that make billions of dollars from it, such as Electronic Arts and Activision Blizzard. Anyway, what is your opinion on the United Kingdom pretty much slamming companies like Electronic Arts and this loot box mess? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or found any informative value, and make sure to follow my other social media accounts for updates on new videos. Links are always down in the description below. I'm most active on Twitter, giving opinions on news that I do not always get into video form, so make sure to follow me over there. Also check out my Discord for all sorts of discussion on games. And again, thank you for joining. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.